Okay, Tzadik Beis on the Beis, 92b. Having listed a whole bunch of verses that seem to, or that support the idea of the resurrection, the entire Mishnah began, the whole discussion began, with the statement that one is required to believe or have faith that the resurrection of the dead is derived from Scripture. It's not enough that one believe it exists. One ought to believe that there is scriptural proof for the resurrection as well. And the Gemara went through a whole list of verses that would indicate it, or that would be a citation for this. Now the Gemara asks, why not raise one more? Now the way in which the Gemara asks this, it seems, it's very interesting. I'm going to translate it for you, but it would seem to me that the entirety of this Gemara is following a particular view. By the way, the Gemara rejects the next citation. And the Gemara says like this. It's Tzadik Beis Beis, so it's 92b, and it's last word on the line. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines from the top of the page. Last word on the line is V'nelef.
Yes, I do. Yes.
So it says the Gemara V'nelef. Why don't we derive the fact?
Yeah.
Sorry?
No, I'm sorry.
V'nelef. Why don't we derive the idea of the resurrection from Scripture? From the fact that Yecheskel revived the dead. That is to say, right, the famous story, the prophet Yecheskel, who was prophesying who was exiled together with, it actually tells us a little bit of the history. Yecheskel was exiled by Nebuchadnezzar with Yechaniah, and there was a king at the time still in Yerushalayim. Yirmiyah was in Eretz Yisrael, and with Tzidkiah, and Yecheskel is in Bavel with Yechaniah, and they're prophesying in different locations. And Yecheskel there in Bavel revives the dead. The famous story that Somerset Evasius, which we'll get into a little bit shortly. The famous, we read it on Shabbos, Chol HaMoed, Pesach. We read the Haftarah, we read the section of the Torah where Yecheskel revives the dry bones, the valley of the dry bones. So the Gemara asks, why don't we derive it from there? If Hashem gave the power to Yecheskel to revive the dead, then certainly God has the power or will revive the dead in the future time. The Gemara is asking, why don't we derive it from there? And the Gemara answers, Savrala, because we're of the view, Command Amar, of the one, like the one who says, Be'emes, that in truth, Mashal Haya, the story of the prophecy of Yecheskel, the story of the dry bones reviving is not a literal story, but a metaphorical story. And thus, it has no bearing on the literal reality of the future resurrection. Mm-hmm. And the point that I want of here, the Gemara is going to get into the details in a second about it being a metaphor and what it's a metaphor for, etc. But I just want to point out that what's interesting, though, it would mean that the entirety of the Gemara till now has been one view. Otherwise, just quote this as a citation, at least according to the view that was literal. You know, the Gemara says, why don't we derive it from the story of Yecheskel? Because he holds, Savarlah, he holds that it was a metaphor. Who's the he? Who's the he? It means that there's at least one view talking the entire time, which is very interesting. Which would mean that, I haven't done any of the research on this, but it would mean that when you're learning this Gemara and you're comparing it to, say, even the Gemara in Saita, at the end we'll talk about the resurrection, well, not the resurrection, talk about Mashiach's coming, it's a little bit different. But the Midrashim, which talk about similar things, you have to compare it as different views speaking, or at least possibly different views speaking. Because here it's a bunch of people have been speaking. It's not like we only quoted one person. We quoted Belezer, we quoted this one, we quoted that one. But they're all following a certain philosophy that believes that the story of Yecheskel is metaphorical. And there's a whole other view that believes that Yecheskel's view, the story of Yecheskel was literal. And somehow they would have another set of learning. It's interesting to note that, I'm just saying. I don't know exactly what it means, but I'm just telling you that this is what's clear from this Gemara we just read. I'm just putting it out there.
The story of Purim, where the two sages were from ranking and one of them rejected the other.
Yeah.
Didn't he revive him?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
Is that a-
There are other stories.
It's a Gemara story.
Yeah,
Well, yeah.
it's in the Gemara. There are other stories like that. There's of course, there's Elisha, Eliyahu Navi with the Ben Ashinamis, and there are other such stories in Nach. Anyway, yeah, now that's another good point. I mean, in other words, something to think about. Why, because Yecheskel revived the dead then, would that be an indication scripturally that there's going to be a revival again? Perhaps, on a simple reading, just thinking now, but you can disagree, the verse is there when Yecheskel describes it. He says, these bones represent all the Jewish people, and here I'm going to revive them. So in other words, he's saying that the action of his revival is also a prophecy. In other words, his prophecy came out as a action. He says, these bones, we're going to see soon, he says, these bones are indicative, are like the entirety of the Jewish people who lost hope. That's what God tells Yecheskel. These bones are a symbolism of the entire Jewish people. And now go ahead and revive them. In the same way they're revived, I'm going to restore them. So there's a kind of prophecy in his behavior too.
For that question, I'm talking about Tkis Amazing.
Yeah.
The reason wouldn't be a contradiction. We're talking about here, Tkis Amazing, first of all, as a large group, as opposed to individual cases, but also there they weren't buried yet. We're talking about Tkis Amazing here when the person
People are buried.
and they're just bones and they come back to life.
That's what I'm saying. When it comes to Yecheskel, it's not just an individual case,
Yes,
because God actually tells him that this is a metaphor.
And these are bones.
Yeah, he tells him that this is. He tells him, he says, Kol Beis Yisrael Hina, that these are the entire Jewish people. God actually explicitly states that this is indicative of the entire Jewish people.
Yeah.
So either it's a metaphor in and of itself for the entire Jewish people, in which case it has no bearing on the literal reality of revival, or his actions were a prophecy. His actions of reviving them is a prophecy of what's to come, thus an actual revival. And therefore the Gemara is asking, why isn't this said as a proof? And the Gemara says that this Gemara, whoever the editor of this Gemara is of the view that it was metaphorical, not literal. So let's see now about the metaphor itself. Tanya Belezer, we've learned that Rebbe Lezer says, Mesim Shech Yecheskel, the dead that Yecheskel revived in the valley of the dry bones, Amdu al Lagreim, they stood up on their feet, V'amru Shira, they sang praise for God, Umesim, they died. That was it. Short revival. Mashira Amru. Sorry? Doesn't say anything like that.
No, legs, Raglayim.
Amdu al Ragleim, they stood up on their legs.
Legs.
They stood on their feet, yes, sorry. V'amru Shira, and they said this song. Umesim, then they died, so it was a short revival. They returned, stood on their feet, praised Hashem, and then went back. They died again. So Mashira Amru, what song did they sing? Quote, they said, Hashem memis b'tzedek, God puts to death in justice. You know, people die justly. Machaya berachamim, and revives with mercy. That's one suggested song that they sang. That was Rebbe Lezer. Rebbe Shua says, Shira zu amru. They said the following shira, which is a similar content, but actually this time it's from a verse, whereas the previous statement wasn't the verse. It was just it's abbreviated version of Tziddik Adin, which is what's said at the beginning of a funeral by one who hasn't been to a cemetery in 30 days. It's a similar content where we praise Hashem, where we acknowledge that God is just in both those who die and mercifully restore their life. So it's an abbreviated version of that. But here, Yeshua's reading is that their shira, their song, was an actual verse. And the verse is similar idea, but just from an actual verse. Hashem memis, God puts to death. Umachayan, gives life. Murdered Sha'ol, puts those down in the grave. Vayal, and brings them back up. End quote. Similar content. Rabbi Huda says, Emes Mashal Haya. Truth, it was a parable or a metaphor. So Rabbi Chemia says, you just said two contradictory things. You said truth, it was a parable. In Emes, if it's truth, Lama Mashal, why is it a parable? Then Mashal, it's a parable. If it's a metaphor, Lama Emes, why is it truth? Ella, rather, you must read Bit Emes Mashal Haya. In truth, it was a parable. As if to say, in truth, don't take the story literally, it was a parable. And in the context of those verses, as I just told you, it would make sense. Because God tells him, these bones are the entirety of these people. In other words, even if you're taking the story literally, the verses indicate that the literal story was in and of itself a prophecy of something greater than the story itself. So the story itself lends itself to be understood as a metaphor, because even if you take it literally, it's only a symbolism for what's really going to happen. So therefore, Buddha says the entirety of the thing was truthfully just a parable. Okay, the Gemara continues. I'm going to read as much as I can from the actual literal Gemara, and I guess we don't have time today, but tomorrow hopefully give some deeper insight into connecting all these parables and all the history to the actual idea of the resurrection as we've been learning it. But let's first cover the ground of the Gemara itself. Rabbi Lezer ben Isha Rabbi Yaglili, Rabbi Lezer, the son of Rabbi Yaglili, says, Omer says, Meisim Shehech Yecheskel, the dead that were revived by Yecheskel, Alu Eretz Yisrael, made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, right, they're in Bavel, they're in the Valley of Dry Bones, Yecheskel's in Bavel. And so they made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, immigrated to Israel. The Nosim Nashim, married women, Velidu Banum and Banais, and gave birth to sons and daughters. In other words, this was very literal. Rabbi Yehuda just said it was a metaphor. So says Rabbi Lezer, son of Rabbi Yaglili, it's so literal that they actually just completely assimilated into the society of Eretz Yisrael. Amr Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Raglov. Rabbi Yehuda, son of Beseira, stood up on his feet. Yehuda ben Beseira, one of the children of Beseira, is a famous link in the chain of our tradition, preceding Hillel the elder, the original Hillel, and Shammai, and end of the Zugais period, beginning of the Tanaic period, the Bnei Beseira. The after the prophets you have Ashtkes Zagdola, the men of the Great Assembly. After the men of the Great Assembly, you have about 5 or 6 generations of Zugais, pairs of sages who ran the Jewish people, and then at the end of the pairs, you have Bnei Beseira, the sons of Beseira, who were the link to the beginning of the Tanaic age, which begins with the elder Hillel and Shammai, and then their students Shimon, Gamliel, so Yehuda Hanasi, and the generation of the Mishnah itself. So this is Yehuda ben Beseira, about, let's say, 5 or so generations before the Mishnah is written. So Yehuda ben Beseira stands up on his legs, which means, I'm saying this because it means he's not that far off from the prophecy of Yecheskel. The prophecy of Yecheskel happens at the end of the first temple, end of the first Beis Mikdash, and Yehuda ben Beseira, who's about 5 generations before the writing of the Mishnah, is somewhere in the middle of the second temple. So he's within 200-year range of the prophecy itself, maybe 250 years, roughly. So it's not like someone 1,000 years later saying, he's not that far off. So Yehuda ben Beseira, Amad Yehuda ben Beseira al Raglov, Yehuda ben Beseira stood up on his legs, and says, I, Yehuda ben Beseira, mi bnei bneiim, I am from the descendants of those who Yecheskel revived. V'halalu tefillin, and here are the tefillin, she'eniach li avi abba, which my grandfather, my father's father, gave to me, mehem, from them. He's not that far off, right? So let's say it's 6 generations. So he's going back to his grandfather, it's 4 generations or something, 5 generations. So it's not that long of a tradition to say, I am one of them, and here's the tefillin. Okay, I think the end of the Yehuda ben Beseira statement is this, and now the Gemara gets into, if we're going to take the story literally, who are these people that were revived? Maninu meisim shechli Yecheskel. Who are these people that Yecheskel revived? And the Gemara gives a few different options. Rav says, Elu b'nei Ephraim, these are the sons of the tribe of Ephraim, Yosef's grandchildren. Shamanu lekates, who counted the end of days, the end of the Egyptian exile. God said 400 years. They miscalculated, as Rashi explains for us. They counted from the beginning of the covenant as opposed to the beginning of Yitzchak's birth. So thus they came to a conclusion that the exile must be over earlier than it actually was. The Torah made a mistake, and V'shinem, as the verse reads, Ubnei Ephraim Shutelach Ubered B'noi V'tachat B'noi V'elda B'noi V'tachat B'noi V'zeved B'noi V'shutelach B'noi V'ezer, or V'elad V'hargum Anshe Ges Another Ba'aretz. So the verse says that it lists who the children in Divrei Yom Chronicles. It lists who the children of Ephraim are: Shutelach and his son Bered, his son Tachas, his son Elda, his son Zeved, his son Shutelach, his son Ezer, and Elad, and they were killed by the people of Gat who were born in the land. And they were killed because they tried to escape Egypt. They figured the time is up, so they started going out, and they were killed. The Ksiv in the verse reads, and their father, or their grandfather Ephraim, mourned many days. And Ephraim's brothers, I assume Menashe and his metaphorical brothers, his uncles, the tribes, came to try to comfort him. So these people, Ephraim's children who escaped Egypt early and died, they're the ones that were revived by Yecheskel. One reading. Shmuel says, Elu b'nei Adam, these are people, shekafru b'tchias hamesim, who denied that there's going to be the resurrection. Those are the people that were the dry bones. Shenemar, as the verse reads, Vayomer Elai, God told me, says Yecheskel, in this prophecy with the dry bones, Ben Adam, son of man, human being, God says to Yecheskel. That's how he addresses him. Human being. Hatzamas Ela, these bones, Kol Beis Yisrael Hema, they are a metaphor for the entirety of the Jewish people. Hey Na'imrim, because they say, Yav Shuas Masvenu, our bones are dried up, Va'avda Tikvasenu, and our hope is lost, and Exarna Lanu, and it's been cut off for us. In other words, we're done, we're doomed. So God's telling Moshe, telling Yecheskel that these dry bones are a metaphor for the Jewish people. But which Jewish people? The ones who lost hope, the ones who say we're cut off, there's no end. So these are the ones who denied Tchias Hamesim. Option number 2. So option number 1 of who the revival of the dry bones are is the children of Ephraim who escaped Egypt early. Option number 2 is that they are the deniers of the resurrection. Option number 3, Rabbi Abba Omer, the son of Abba Omer says, Elu b'nei Adam, these are people she'ein b'hen lachluches shel mitzvah, that have no wetness or joy, excitement. Lachluches is literally means wetness, but it means someone who has like life, right? In science, when they look for a sign of life, they look for liquid, right? They're looking on Mars now for liquid. They want to see if there's any life. If it's all dry, it means no life. So lacking life, they're lacking wetness, they're lacking liquid, they're lacking life in their mitzvah. They do mitzvahs, but do it out of rote, dry. Shnemar, as the verse reads, the dry bones, Shimu Dvar Hashem, listen to the words of God. They have the bones, they have the mitzvahs, but it's dry, it's lacking life, it's lacking excitement, it's lacking enthusiasm. Option number 3. So those who left Egypt early, option 1, the sons of Ephraim. Option 2, those who denied the resurrection, lost hope. Option 3 are those who lack excitement and they're doing the mitzvahs. Mm-hmm. Option number 4, there's going to be a 5th option. I'll try to get through both of them quickly, and then tomorrow we'll talk more about them. I don't know if I'm able to do that, but let's see. Abitzak Nafka says, Elu b'nei Adam, these are the people, shechipu es ha'heichal kulam shkatzim u'ramashim. There were people, I think they're Jews, must have been Jews, who I suppose towards the end of the second temple, or the end of the first temple, were so entrenched in idol worship that they went to the temple and they covered it with drawings. Yes, they covered it with drawings of insects and creepy crawlies. In other words, they colored it with impure animals. Shenemar, the verse reads. That's yeah.
It's interesting. There's a Mr. Gosman graffiti. Like you have graffiti now, which is pretty crass there.
Crass. What was crass graffiti? Making pictures of all the impure animals that God says not to eat on the temple wall. Shenemar, the verse reads, "V'avoy, and I came." Yecheskel speaking. Ve'era, and I saw. V'hinei kol tabnis nemes ubehema sheketz v'chol golei beis Yisrael mechuka ala kir saviv. I came and I saw, and behold, throughout every image of every creepy crawly and every animal that's impure, and all the impurities of the house of Israel, means all the idol worship, mechuka, were etched or drawn on the walls all around. You see Yecheskel describing the scene when he arrives in the temple. And because it's the Golulei Beis Yisrael, it's the idol worship that the Jews were serving, it's indicative that Jews did it. The Ksiv Hasim, when it says there, with respect to the resurrection of those who were in the valley, and they were passed around me, or I passed around them around and around. So the association of around, he says that I saw the drawings all around the temple, Saviv. I went to revive them around. The around association to teach it to the same people.
Actually twice in the pasuk.
So the extra one is to teach you.
So the both in that too.
So we have how many options so far? The Ephraim people who escaped. Sorry.
Is this the 4th one now?
Yeah. So the people who escaped early from Egypt, the sons of Ephraim, those who deny the resurrection of the dead, those who lack excitement in their mitzvahs, and option number 4 is those who drew pictures, defaming pictures on idolatrous pictures and defaming and impure pictures on the halls of the temple. And then option number 5, and we'll conclude with that for today. Rabbi Yochanan says, Elu Mesim Shebebikas Dura. These are the ones who died in the valley of Dura. The valley of Dura is mentioned in Daniel, but there's not the reference here. Or it's the same valley, but I don't think the stories are connected. So you can explain who are the people in the valley of Dura, right? Because it happens in the valley of the dry bones. What valley is it? So here the Gemara is saying it's the valley of Dura. What happened in Dura? Rabbi Yochanan says, Minar Eshel, from the river of Eshel, Ad Rabas, to a place called Rabas, because Dura, that is what constitutes the valley of Dura. So what happened? When Nebuchadnezzar, when at the time when Nebuchadnezzar, the wicked king, exiled the Jewish people from Israel, and they're marching towards Babylonia. There were young men, good-looking men. They were showing off their physique in the sun.
Or maybe they embarrassed the sun because they were so beautiful. So
Embarrassed the sun.
Yeah,
They overshadowed. That pun intended. They overshadowed the sun with their beauty. They were showing off their physique. And there were Kasdian women, Royos Oisin, who saw them, the Shoifas Zavos, and they produced Zavos, which is a certain liquid that comes from a woman's body, because they were so excited about these good-looking men that they started to produce this liquid. Amrul Ba'alein, they told their husbands about the beauty of these men. Uba'aleim l'melech, and the husbands told the king, Nebuchadnezzar, that there are these Jewish men that are showing themselves off to our wives. Tziva Melech, the king commanded, V'hargum, and killed all these young boys, all these young men, for making their husbands jealous, I suppose. And the women were still excited about these men, even after their death. I guess even in their death, they still looked good. Tziva HaMelech, the king commanded, V'ramsum, and they trampled upon them. They trampled upon them to disform them so that they don't look appealing anymore. So those are the 5 options of who the dead might have been. So God willing, tomorrow we're going to discuss what's the connection between all these things, what's the connection to the resurrection of the dead, and moreover, when we say be'emes mashal haya, when something is a metaphor, there has to be an inherent connection between the metaphor and the analog. So the metaphor of the dry bones, in connection to these 5 options of who these 5 people are somehow connected to the resurrection of the dead itself. So we have to tie all of these things together, and God willing, we'll suggest a path to do that. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Rabbi,